Hey everybody, this is your 10 o'clock night with Marianne thing that we'll be doing every night for a while. And Kelton on our team made it very clear to me that I'm supposed to just talk about like sweet nothings until people have a chance to get on. So Lauren on our team said that I should make sure that you know that I know that Taylor Swift's boyfriend is going to the Super Bowl. I think is that what it is, guys? Going to the Super Bowl, which is lovely. What else should I talk about until people get here? Somebody said, I saw you in Nashville, which is lovely. Thank you. See that people are coming on. You're still running for president? Yes. Like the live. I love you. Thank you. Much love to you. This is going to be kind of hard when I'm trying to read things because I'll have to put on my glasses. Okay, so I think I'm going to start talking. I'm not that good at small talk. Maybe I am sometimes, but okay. All right, so I'd like to have some serious conversations with you, as you know. And I want to start tonight because I'm going to be on every night. I want to start with a larger conceptual vision of what I believe is what politics should be. Politics comes from a root, Latin root, politea, means of the people. When we think of politics too often today, we think of a machine, and it is a machine. And the more it's about the machine, the less it is about the people. And the machine is about money, and the machine is about power. And as someone who's, run for president twice, I can tell you it is as corrupt as you might fear or know that you know. But, one of the things that I've said often on this campaign, and I had done it before as well, that the American people are not the problem. Everywhere I've gone, it's very clear to me that we're decent people. We're not more decent than people in any other country, but we are a decent people. The problem is not that. The problem is this sclerotic political system that sort of sits on top of the will of the people. And that's contrary to the entire point of American democracy, which is that theoretically, and no, we've never fully manifested this, nobody saying that we have, but at our best, we've really tried, and we have expanded the franchise. The idea, what the founders were saying was, if you have free public education, then people will have educated critical thought processes, which Jefferson said was necessary in order to govern a great nation. If you have a free press, then people have access to information. If you have freedom of assembly, people can talk among themselves. So the idea was that if we had those things, that our own conscience, our own wisdom, just who we are, regardless of where we came from, regardless of any externality about us, once again, nobody's saying we've ever fully actualized this, that the founders weren't saying we would always make the right decision, but that over time, this would be the way Jefferson put it was, the only safe repository for power in the United States is in the hands of the people. There's something very profound about that to me, just who we are, no matter where we come from, no matter our socioeconomic status, that there's a nobility and a wisdom within people. And my career has really shown that to me throughout over 40 years of being with people in all walks of life. There's just something in us that's not about the externals, but the internal nobility of who we are. And that is what should guide not only our personal lives, this sense of an internal knowing of what is good, what is ethical, what is true. But I think that goodness, that sense of what is ethical and what is good and what is true should guide our public policies as well. In 1998, I wrote a book called Healing of America, and I did a lot of deep diving into American history more than I ever had before. And I was particularly interested in the intersection of spirituality and politics. And when I did that, I found that this was hardly a wheel that needed to be invented. And I began to read a lot about Mahatma Gandhi, who articulated his principles of nonviolence. He got a lot of his thinking from the American Transcendentalists, Thoreau, Emerson, Whitman, really fascinating, the Quakers. And then Dr. Martin Luther King had traveled to India. He studied the principles of nonviolence, and he brought them back to the United States for application to the civil rights movement in America in the 1960s. And the more I read about these two, and the more I read about nonviolence, the more I read about what nonviolent political philosophy means, the more intrigued I was. And what's fascinating to me is the relevance that that has to the times in which we live. What Gandhi said was that there is a spirit within every man, woman, and child, that this spirit of goodness, once again, very Quaker, this light, he said, of goodness in every man, woman, and child. He said this light within us not only heals our personal relationships, he said it heals our political, economic, and social relationships as well. Nobody had ever gone there before. And then Dr. King said about Gandhi that he was the first person in human history to take the ethic of love and move it beyond mere personal interaction, that it might become a broad-scale social force for good. That is what nonviolent political philosophy, that's what King was talking about. What King said about the civil rights movement, he said that the desegregation of the American South, he said, is the externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement, but that the ultimate goal is the establishment of the beloved community. So what King said also, he said, we need quantitative changes in our circumstances, but qualitative shifts in our souls. That was also articulated by Gandhi when he said that the end is inherent in the means. In other words, who we are is as important as what we do, because everything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. Okay, so that's nonviolence. Now let's talk about the shift in mindset from the 20th century to the 21st. The 20th century mindset was different than the 19th, and the 21st is different than the 20th. The 20th century mindset was very dominated by what was called Newtonian physics. The world is a big machine, and if you don't like what's happening in the world, you just tweak the pieces of the machine. Now, that means, and this is what the Transcendentalists warned us about with industrialization, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and so forth, the mind, the Western mind specifically, was drawn outside itself to the outer world. And this left us very unbalanced as a species, because there's an inner life and there's an outer life, and a balanced humanity recognizes both. So the politics that we deal with today is very much an outgrowth of 20th century thinking. That's why it's a treatment of symptoms, but very little attention given to root cause. Because it's very difficult. You're not going to find the root cause of most political issues without being willing to look at what's going on inside people. And that's been a big thing in my presidential campaign, that I don't want to be a president who just looks at symptoms. I want to look at root cause. So where someone like the Biden administration is reading economic data, I'm reading human despair. What makes people act the way they act? And if you really want to change what's happening as a result of people's actions, look at what's happening in their lives that might have driven them to act a certain way, good or bad. So 21st century is very different than 20th. Because 21st century thinking is far more holistic, far more integrative. This is one of the reasons that Gen Z has been fascinating to me. Gen Z, they're not even 20th century people. Many of them weren't even born in the 20th century. And those who were, many of them were just like there for a few years as babies. It's a far more holistic, far more inside, outside, you know. I mean, I remember speaking in a couple of colleges where I noticed, well, one question would be about Syria and the next question about depression. I mean, you don't get that in older people who think, well, isn't that like a separate conversation? And to many people, younger people, like, no. And I grew up in a time, you know, we would read, when I was in college, we would read Alan Watts and Ram Dass in the morning, and we would go to anti-war protests in the afternoon. So there wasn't this idea of lanes. It was a time of the counterculture, the countercultural revolution, and it was many things. It was the music, it was the politics, it was the sexual revolution, it was culture, it was everything, and nobody was expected to stay in their lane because life isn't like that. We're people, we're multidimensional beings. Staying on the topic of politics, though, many of the problems, in fact, most of the problems that we're having collectively in terms of political issues are the product of 20th century thinking. Now, our politics is stuck in 20th century thinking, so the traditional politician is coming at all these 21st century problems through the filter of a 20th century mindset. So remember that whole Gandhian thing, and remember what I said, everything you do is infused with the consciousness with which you do it. The idea here is that if you just apply 20th century thinking to 21st century problems, all we're going to do is perpetuate the problems. So in choosing the next president, you're not just choosing based on what they did in the past, although that's important, but what I think, it's good to have someone who's schooled in the thinking of now and a more holistic perspective. And what happened to me in my life was that I spent a long career dealing with people in some of the worst times of their lives. The joke used to be that, people didn't call Marianne when things were going well. I was the person, the test results came back and, it's not good, it's cancer, or, the doctor said there's nothing more we can do, or bankruptcy is the only option, or your spouse left you unexpectedly, or someone you love died, or you found out your child is addicted to, crystal meth or something. And so I had kind of the privilege of being with people in some of the darkest hours of their lives, I learned about crisis, personal crisis. And, I've lived my own life, so we've all gone through crises. But the thing that was true for me when my career started in the 1980s and for those first couple of decades was that I would meet people whose lives were in crisis, but the crisis was the exception and not the rule. And also that was a period of time in America where, when the country went through something, the crisis was the exception and not the rule. About 20 years later, I noticed things began to change around 2000. I began to see it in the lives of so many people, but I also began to see it ultimately in the country itself. And that's how many people I met who were going through crisis, but people for whom the state of crisis was the rule and not the exception. They didn't have health care. They had to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. They were so exhausted, they didn't have time for their kids. They were worried about whether or not they'd lose their home. Rent was too high. I began to realize how many of the people I met whose lives were in crisis were because of bad public policy. And then too many people that I'd meet who were like political types would look at people such as myself and hope that maybe we could make people feel better. Really? Why don't you stop driving people crazy? Why don't you stop passing public policies that make it so hard for people just to survive? And that's what I began to see. And I began to see that, and I would talk to people I knew who were counselors, therapists, clergy, and everybody's just having to take care of people all the time in this, amazingly wealthy nation for whom life was so hard. Now, if you are clergy, if you're a spiritual counselor, if you're a therapist, this is what you do. You cater to people whose lives are in trouble all the time. That's part of the skill set. That's part of the job. But anybody, you don't have to be any of those careers to have seen that something's happened in the last 20 years in this country. And you cannot take a good look at that and not recognize how much of that is economic. And that's when I began to be interested in politics, and that has informed my view of things politically. And that's why the core of my presidential campaign has been addressing the realization that our economy is so rigged. Now remember, I started my career in the early 80s. In the 1970s, we still had a thriving middle class in this country. The average American couple could afford a house, and they could afford a car, and they could afford a yearly vacation. One parent could stay home with the kids if they wished. One salary could support a family of 4, and that couple could afford to send their kids to college. But starting particularly in the 1980s, this massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. And it has resulted in people's lives falling apart. And we were told, the philosophy, the economic philosophy was trickle-down economics. And the idea was that all that a corporation had to do was adhere to fiduciary responsibility for its stockholders. And that would be at the expense of the other stakeholders being workers and community and environment. And the idea was that these stockholders and CEO class would become so wealthy, and it would be great, because they would become job creators. And then all that wealth would trickle down, and it would lift all boats. Well, it's been 40 some odd years. Clearly, it didn't lift all boats. It left millions of people without even a life vest, and it threw millions of people off the lifeboats and the regular boats that they were already on. To the point where now our middle class, that thriving middle class that we had in the 1970s, has collapsed. And like I said, this is not just data. This is people's lives. This is the fact that 39% of Americans now report that they regularly skip meals in order to pay their rent. The fact that half of renters now report they can't really afford their rent. We had over 3 million evictions last year. We have, a majority of Americans who cannot afford to absorb a $500 unexpected expenditure, a majority of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. This is a lot of human despair. And then we talk about a mental health crisis. Well, constant, chronic economic stress and anxiety. What do you expect? How could people not be depressed? And when I think of people, particularly young people, there's college loans. When I was young, there was tuition-free college and tech school in this country. University of Texas, University of Florida, University of California all had systems. In fact, it was when Ronald Reagan became governor in California and smashed all that. That's when the Koch brothers went, ooh, he's our guy. We like him. Make everything private sector, take everything away from the public sector, privatize, privatize, privatize. Now, the first principle of the United States is that it's supposed to be that the government brokers a balance between individual liberty, which does include, economic liberty, and concern for the common good. Going back to those stockholders and, make the stockholders rich. The idea was that they would be job creators, but their business model was not job creation so much as job elimination. There was an incredible movie about that with George Clooney a few years ago. I think it was called Up in the Air. I think it was called Up in the Air, I'm not sure, something like that. Brilliant movie. And there are all these scenes where he was just sent in by the corporation to just fire people and to see the devastation of people's lives and people begging him not to fire them, because what are they going to do? Because we don't have universal health care. And I think a lot of people don't realize how different this is than the state of the citizen in every other advanced democracy. When I talk in my campaign about tuition-free college and tech school, subsidized childcare, tuition-free, obviously college, removal of the college loan debts, Medicare for all, improved Medicare for all, so that it includes eyesight, glasses, hearing aids, dental, mental health care. These are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. Guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed affordable housing, guaranteed living wage. This shouldn't be considered so out there. Remember, the corporate Democrat today is what the Republicans were when I was growing up. The Overton window has moved so far to the right. And so now, 20% of Americans are doing fine. And I'm among those 20%, and I'm grateful. The problem in America is not that some people can do well. That's beautiful. What's bad is that the vast majority of people never really have a shot at it. and just live on this constant stress. One woman, the way she put it to me about her own circumstances, she said, there is no wiggle room. And when I think of these young people with the college loan debt, what did they take them out for? They took them out because they're trying to self-actualize, which I thought was the whole point of the American dream. And particularly young people of color who are told, get an education, that's the way you'll close the wage gap. Now, when I think of who I was in my 20s, the idea, debt is crippling at any age. But to be in your 20s and to carry tens of thousands of dollars of college loan debt, and I was reading the other day about how many college kids in America are living in their car. Okay, somebody says you still haven't answered our question, so I'll go to the questions. But I want to have this all within a context. So that's why an economic Bill of Rights is core to my campaign. We'll talk in the ensuing nights. I'll have some guests some nights. I'll talk about waging peace. I'll talk about a Department of Children and Youth. We'll talk about the climate crisis. We're talking about declaring a climate emergency. We'll talk about ending America's drug war. So we'll talk about a lot of things. But I wanted to start with this idea of nonviolence and talk about this idea of economics. And this whole thing about nonviolence. The point there is that, when we love each other enough, miracles do happen. And there have been times in American history when seemingly impossible things did happen. Ending slavery would have seemed impossible at one point. Getting women the right to vote would have seemed impossible at one point. Establishing labor unions would have seemed impossible, and desegregating the American South would have seemed impossible. And one of the things I'm fascinated by, and that I think is a very relevant conversation for our generation, is the characterological shifts that are necessary in us to repudiate the systems of injustice that tyrannize us. And the systems of injustice that tyrannize the average American today are systems of economic tyranny. And I believe we need a president who addresses that. Okay. Women need our body autonomy back. Yeah, I agree with that. Here's a question. What are your thoughts? Wait a minute. I think that somebody said if I can just... Thank you. For those of you who want to know about Israel and Palestine, please go now. Kelton told me to tell you that it's on the playlist on TikTok. If you go to my website, Marianne2024.com, there is under the menu all the stuff that I've written about Israel and Palestine. Also, there's the interview I did with Daisy Gideon in Lebanon. I hope that is on there. I know it's definitely on my social media. Grace, do you know if that interview with Daisy is on the Israel and Palestine page?
All three of them.
Would you talk? Okay, really? On that page? Good. And let me just give you the gist of it, and also the war and peace. So I started, obviously, first of all, I wrote an article about Israel and Palestine for Newsweek magazine a couple of years ago, and I recommend that you read that. It's about unprocessed trauma. And this drama started long before October 7th. And I have been talking about this issue for a very long time. I've been talking about the fact that the occupation of the West Bank is illegal, the settlements were illegal, the siege, the blockade of Gaza. Nothing can take away from the evil or the brutality of the Hamas attacks on October 7th. And two things can exist at the same time. And we know that those things do not exist in a vacuum. And you'll look at the video that I did. I have not supported this war. And we need an immediate ceasefire. And we need a release of the hostages that are still being held. And we need the architecture for a two-state solution. That is my position. I do not understand why why the president goes along with Netanyahu as he does. He says he wants to ramp down the war. No, we need to end it. And I do not believe the United States should support it in any way. And I don't say that as someone who does not support Israel. I support Israel. I support the Palestinians. We have to support humanity. You know, our North Star is the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. And that doesn't just mean all Americans. Our highest alliance must be to humanity itself. So that's where I stand. And you can look at more of what I've written and more of my videos at the page, Israel and Palestine. Immigration. Immigration, first of all, I want to talk for a minute about the undocumented people in the United States. We force people to live in the shadows. We make it hard for people. Our immigration laws make it hard for people. Let's be very clear. The immigrant population in the United States, the vast majority of people, who are people who work hard, contribute to the economy, pay taxes, and get nothing out of it. I also think that we should realize that Ronald Reagan gave millions of people amnesty. When I was young, people who had come into this country were simply a matter of going to the registry office. Also DACA. It's terrible that these kids can't just be told, live your lives. The lack of compassion that has settled into the human psyche in this country towards immigrants is very disturbing. And asylum is a sacrosanct principle. Now, obviously, there's too much going on down there. But I was in Eagle Pass, Texas, a couple months ago. I'll tell you who knows what to do is the people in Eagle Pass. And I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. People have been walking across the Mexico-Texas border like hello for centuries. So Congress has failed us terribly. You need more infrastructure there. And the president has wanted to spend $8.5 billion, 4 more judges, 4 more infrastructure, and it's the Republicans who have not wanted him to do that because they like making it an issue in the election. What we must do, first of all, realize this. No wall is going to fix this. No surveillance system is going to fix this. We're going to have the infrastructure there. But we also have to deal root cause. Remember what I told you. We can't just treat symptom. We have to treat root cause. Now, the issue is, what is it that is causing this surge? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are seeking escape from horrifying conditions in Latin America. And if you look at many of those conditions, you do see America's fingerprints too often. First of all, many of the destabilized economies in Latin America, from which people who now face devastating economic circumstances are trying to flee, in many cases, it was America's foreign policy over the last few decades that helped to destabilize these economies. I think the United States should be open to a real system of repair, an almost Latin American Marshall Plan by which we, in a very targeted way, help to restabilize some of these economies that we ourselves helped destabilize. That would include removing the sanctions on Venezuela. We should also remove the sanctions on Cuba, and we should take Cuba off the terrorism list. And I want to say something about that with Cuba, because Cuba, Julian Assange, the Iran deal, those are all issues where many of us just assumed that when Joe Biden took office, that he would reverse what Donald Trump did, and he would go back to what Barack Obama had done. Assange is okay. I would drop all charges against Assange immediately. This is true of Cuba. Obama had tried to open up Cuba, and also the Iran deal. And instead, Biden stayed with the policies of Donald Trump in ways that have surprised many of us. The other issue has to do with the drug cartels. That's the other thing that is so much a root cause of so much of the immigration out of Latin America, and that is the horrifying violence that is perpetrated by the drug cartels. I do not believe that America's war on drugs is helping. The American war on drugs began in 1971, and there was a man named John Ehrlichman, who was one of the people from the Nixon administration, who actually, he went to prison over Watergate. And when he got out, he spilled the beans. He went through a major personal transformation, understandably. He spilled the beans about so much, but the stuff that he said about Nixon and the drug war was particularly interesting. He said that Nixon absolutely knew this isn't America's #1 public enemy, because at that time it certainly wasn't. The drug war started in 1971. We have spent $1 trillion on this. It clearly has not solved the problem of drug addiction in the United States. What it has done is to exacerbate it. Not only has it exacerbated it, it has also fed what we now call the prison industrial complex. Because when I was in college, there were 300,000 people incarcerated in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. And almost half of all federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. Now, we spend now $100 billion every year on the war on drugs. If we end the war on drugs, we can take a fraction of that money and build a world-class network of recovery options. The vast majority of people who are addicted in the United States want to get sober. And we should make it easier. I want to bring recovery into the political mainstream ethers. I don't want, often they say a president has a drug czar. I don't want a drug czar. I want a recovery czar. Now, how does this relate to the southern border? This will help take away the business model, because it takes away the black market from the drug cartels. It won't completely fix it, but it will go far towards helping. And also, then that will give us the resources and the bandwidth to go after the drug that is a public enemy #1, and that is fentanyl. That one, absolutely. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. And I don't know how long I've been on, how long I'm supposed to be on. Hold on a second, I have my glasses here. Okay. How do we stop insider trading? Well, you pass a law. This idea that people we have examples of this. We know people who are on committees, people who have classified information, people who are privy, who are serving in Congress, who are privy to certain information, and then they go and call their, call their broker. I remember one California congressman, I think, he might be in jail right now. He actually called his broker about something he heard about in Congress on the lawn of the White House, and someone they traced the call, and I think he went to jail, actually. Okay. I said it before, I like you. I was told that I don't know how to stop it. Okay, I get to vote. My vote is going to you, Marianne. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm honored by that. I talked about Israel and Palestine. I talked about, now I don't know how to get it started again. Oh, guys, I'm so sorry. Because I was told that if I push it, it will stop. Okay, now it's going again. Would you be Donald Trump's VP? No, I don't. First of all, Donald Trump is not choosing me as VP, but no, I would not be Donald Trump's VP. How do you feel about being the first woman president? Well, I think that would be just lovely. I met Nikki Haley, by the way. She was very nice. I met her standing in New Hampshire next to the elevator. We were staying on the same floor of the hotel. I certainly do not agree with her politics, as she does not agree with mine, but she was a very nice person, and that's lovely. Didn't you suspend your campaign on Zoom? No, I did not. Talk about the Department of Education. She does not care about veterans. Oh, really? That is certainly untrue. Are you planning, will you protect transgender Americans? Yes, as a matter of fact, one of the first things I would do as president is to confer special protection status on transgender Americans who are a targeted group right now. Listen, this is very important to me. I'm a bit of a romantic about American democracy and about its founding, and the Declaration of Independence is our mission statement. Abraham Lincoln called it an eternal rebuke against all forms of oppression and, what did he say, of oppression and tyranny. That's why it was the moral basis in Lincoln's mind for the Civil War and the abolition of slavery. You can't say all men are created equal and then tolerate slavery. You can't say all men are created equal and then have the institutionalized suppression of women. You cannot say all men are created equal and then tolerate segregation. And this issue of transgender Americans, I mean, the whole point of America is that no matter who somebody is, white, black, gay, straight, non-binary, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, black, white, brown, old, young, rich, poor. The ideal, once again, never fully actualized. No one says it has been. But at our best, and it's not only that at our best we have actualized it, but every generation's responsibility is to not only protect the ideal from encroachment, and a lot of that encroachment today is from inside the house, right? The big dangers, assaults, the undemocratic forces are here, but also do what we can to expand it in our time. You know, the Declaration of Independence says, all men have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments are instituted to secure those rights. And if government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. So governments are instituted to secure our rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not chip away at those rights, diminish those rights. Tell a woman what to do with her body, or what anyone should do sexually, or any of that. That's not government's job. And if I'm your president, you will know that somebody's in charge of the executive branch who will not tolerate that stuff. Wouldn't happen on my watch. Okay, I think I've probably done enough for tonight. Oh, climate change. Okay, why don't we do this? Climate change. I would, listen, I'll just give you a little peek, and then tomorrow night we'll go into climate change in a bigger way. We need to be ramping down fossil fuel extraction, not ramping it up. It seems when it comes to big oil, I don't care if these presidents are Democrats or Republicans, they fall in line with big oil. Our president, our current president, has given more oil drilling permits than even Donald Trump did. And he okayed the Willow Project. One of the first things I would do as president is to cancel the Willow Project. And the LNG, the liquefied natural gas project in Alaska as well. We need a mass mobilization to transition from majority economy to a clean economy. We need a massive, massive transfer of resources to build a green economy. Wind, solar, everything involved. And we can do that, and we will create millions of jobs in the process. You declare a climate emergency if you have to. Maybe you won't have to, but if it's necessary, I absolutely would. I think sometimes this country forgets that we've done great things. In fact, Americans are kind of hardwired to do great things. I think that's part of what the problem today. I think one of the reasons that we're kind of depressed is because we're not called to great things. And transitioning to a clean economy is a great thing. We also need to transition from a war economy to a peace economy, which we will also talk about. But I'm going to be here every night at 10 o'clock, and we'll talk about things. And thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your being with me. And tell your friends, and we'll be here every night at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock East Coast, 7 o'clock West Coast. And I said we'll talk about climate change tomorrow night. Maybe I'll try to get some great guests. We'll figure that out. Okay? You have a wonderful night, and thank you so much for being with me. Bye.